David Schwartz is from the Litecoin Foundation. We're here to talk about the Litecoin proposed ETF. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Chango. Nice to see you again.
Like you said earlier, before the show started, we met at the RFK event back in, was it 2022?
I think, actually. 2023 in Miami. Yeah, it was an event at a home there in the local area. Yep, for RFK Jr.
He was still in the running at that time for the Democratic presidential candidate. You've gone through myriad transformations for Litecoin at the Litecoin Foundation. Can you catch us up to what's been going on until present day?
For the most part, if anybody who doesn't know what we do at the foundation, we're a nonprofit. We're a 501c3 in the States, and then we also have a nonprofit org in Singapore. Between the two of them, they're set up to help facilitate the awareness, education, and adoption of Litecoin, the fully decentralized cryptocurrency that's been around since 2011. And it was created in 2017. The foundation was by Charlie and a few others. We function really based off of pretty much a shoestring budget. There's not really much of a treasury. We go off of donations. A lot of it is also through the kindness of Charlie and his participation fully to this day still. Some of the things that we've done in the past people might be aware of is when we sponsored the UFC in a fight in LA with John Jones, and then we also sponsored with the Miami Dolphins for a season. And we've done a few other things to sort of bring some attention to Litecoin. It's it's the number one used crypto for payments on a lot of the platforms around the world, including the biggest, which is BitPay. And as you mentioned earlier, we're now up in the running for a single asset ETF in the United States. And so things are looking pretty good. I would think that there's more to come. One ETF really isn't an end goal, right? It's kind of like just the door opening. And we'd like to see if it can make it in the United States as a single asset ETF and be the first one since Ethereum and Bitcoin, which it kind of seems like that's where it's headed, then it should be leagues easier to do that anywhere else in the world, with the US having basically the strictest regulations towards that, at least to this point anyway.
At the time of recording, which is January 21st, 2025, the Trump Doge ETFs had been, or they've since applied. Do you have a thesis about the incoming ETF landscape? It seems that we have gone from meme coins being a joke to meme coins being a serious class.
With the incoming administration, I can't even say incoming, with the current administration now, I think what they've done is they've pretty much blown the door open on at least people feeling strong enough or confident enough to file these ETFs. I mean, not how quickly they get approved or how long it takes for them to be scrutinized is something completely different. But the other thing that happened today, beyond just those other ETFs being filed, was the SEC came out with a notice that with Hester Pierce, I believe, heading it from the SEC side, they're looking at revamping how they deal with digital assets or cryptos in general, and potentially how they are seen maybe enforcing it, right, versus how it was sort of a reactive. Almost like they were just looking for things to be wrong with crypto versus this new administration and the people heading up the SEC, where it's more like taking it from a more of a level playing field kind of a thing. To quote the Litecoin handle earlier today, who talked about it, probably more normalized or more normal in how they would approach any asset or security or whatever that potentially violates something or is looking to have something filed on their behalf.
Do you have like a good theory about where the new going to head with respect to their relationship dynamic to ETFs and crypto in general?
I think
like it definitely doesn't feel like they're trying to be adversarial anymore.
No, not at all. And that's probably the biggest thing you can take away from it, is that it's not going to be an adversarial thing. It's going to be more like how they would approach anything else that's filing or potentially has done something good or bad within the realm of whatever sphere of influence the SEC has, right? So if you looked at, like, even leading up to the last couple of days of when Gensler was in his position, he was reiterating, filings against or appeals against like XRP and a few other things, just like even on the way out the door, that's what he was doing. And so what they're trying to do now with Ueda and Pierce is to sort of just let everybody know that's not how we're going to approach things. We're going to look at it more pragmatic and from not a whack-a-mole type of view, but more like we'll approach things with a more common sense sort of approach. And so that's a good thing for them to like even just put that letter out there saying she's heading the crypto part of it. And this is how we view crypto going forward. And that I think is also the reason why you saw so many filings just within the last, 3 days or something. It's just insane how many ETF filings have come out now.
For any crypto project going forward, if let's say an ETF filing is the end goal for them, an ETF filing that successfully passes would be a moonshot goal. Do you think it's advisable for them to continuing applying the Howey test, or is that no longer relevant?
So I think there's a couple different questions there. I think for an end goal for a crypto, ultimately you're looking at like what's the main purpose of the crypto to begin with, or the digital asset, right? So there's some that the utility isn't really necessarily a mainstream thing. Maybe it's very niche, but there's still a possibility of them looking to be a part of maybe a basket of an ETF. So you're going to see those too, right? So far, you're seeing maybe some single asset ETFs, but I think basket ETFs become a big deal where you end up having a cluster of, 4 to 10 in an ETF. And that way people are getting exposure maybe there's a meme ETF and it takes the top 5 market cap memes and they put them into an ETF, that type of a thing, or proof of work ETF. And so then anything like Bitcoin, Litecoin, a Dogecoin, anything else that might fit popular enough and has enough liquidity be added into one of those. And so maybe that's sort of, at least within the regular TradFi, the traditional TradFi, it being a part of one of those ETFs, maybe that's an end goal in that respect. I know there's some that maybe just get excited about a filing because that puts interest in their coin and maybe they get a kick in price for that. But, maybe realistically, it's not necessarily something that gets approved or gets approved immediately, but then, or even if it gets approved, is there going to be any real interest in investing in it, which is probably the biggest thing. Because these companies that put them out there, whether it's a BlackRock or a Canary or anybody else, Bitwise, VanEck, they're looking for transactional value, right? That's where they get their revenue, is by people buying and selling and whatever else. So they want something that's going to have volume to it and interest.
Yeah, those are the same KPIs as what a centralized exchange listing would look for.
Exactly. Right. It's literally like a step above a SEX, right? So if you're looking at a centralized exchange, that's what they kind of look for if they're going to be interested in adding one. How much volume is it generating? How much interest is there? Is it long term? Is it just a fad? Once that gets established, then they look at adding. It's the same thing with the ETFs. It's just in a more traditional sense, but the same thing. So I think over time you're going to see hundreds of them probably having ETFs, but maybe not necessarily single ETFs. I think that's going to be a concentration of perhaps 24 maybe or something. Single asset ETFs.
S&P.
Yeah. And so it becomes.
We could have an S&P 500 to cryptos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so that'll dilute some, like there's already God knows how many Bitcoin ETFs, right? And Ethereum ones. And I know Solana and XRP have put a lot of ETFs already out there for consideration. Let's just say theoretically those all get approved. Investors can only invest in so much. And then that's from the retail side. Institutional, they can, there's a lot more money involved. They're going to be very zeroed in on exactly what they're kind of looking for. That still gets diluted over time too, right? So I think Eric Balkunas, who's a ETF analyst, he put it very, very well today, actually, in a post that he had. If you go look at him, he talked about how even if you look at the commodities for precious metals right now, gold and silver get the majority of the attention, with a large portion of that going to gold specifically and then silver. But then you have all these little niche commodities after that. There's palladium, copper, or whatever else you can think of, right? But they're never going to meet the size or demand of a gold or silver. I think that same thing ends up replicating itself within the crypto space for ETFs too.
I would agree. For applying for an ETF, what are the costs involved?
Based off of the small amount of exposure I've had to something like this at this point already, what I've learned is depending on geographically where you're filing them, the costs are much different, right? So if you're looking at something within a South American country, or, you know, I don't know, somewhere maybe out in the Asiatic area, or like Australia or something, it's probably cheaper. Whereas in the United States, there seems to be a heavy fee involved in it. And so I would think that normally if there's a heavy fee involved like that, there's probably quite a bit of cost coming from whoever wants the ETF to be filed, whether that's the BlackRock or the VanEck themselves, or if it's the cryptos themselves, and they, you know, they have a war chest of funds available to help pay for those filing fees. I would imagine they're probably somewhere around, you know, the very high six and then into the seven-figure numbers for that whole process, right? Because you have the actual filing itself, you have legal that has to look over all these things. There's steps to it, right? So there's the S1 that gets filed first, basically like you telling people you're intending on doing this, and that's pretty much all it is. And then there's a 19B-4, which is where you start actually getting serious about it, and you've either had maybe some talks with the SEC, or you've gotten enough information to where you feel comfortable that it would get maybe approved. And then that gets filed by the entity filing it, right? So let's just take Litecoin for example. So Canary Capital is the one that filed it. So Canary ends up filing, and then also they're utilizing, I think, the NASDAQ. So then the NASDAQ files their 19B-4. And so then that's the actual intent. And then that puts the SEC on the clock. The SEC normally has these different dates that they can meet by these deadlines, whether they say yes or no. They can continue to push it out up to, I believe, 240 days. But the first one, I think, is like maybe 90 days or something. I can't quite remember, or 60 days. Anyway, somewhere in there, it's the 2 or 3 month range. They have to make their first initial decision if they're going to punt it out further, or if they're going to make a decision by then. And so that goes on and on until maybe they meet, like they did with all the Bitcoin ones. They pushed out pretty far before they actually made a determination, and then they just approved them all at the same time, right? So it can vary based off of the asset that's being looked at. So for Litecoin, I can talk specifically that it's been concluded by the CFTC and basically by the SEC, is my assumption anyway, that it would be considered a commodity, and it's not centralized. It doesn't have, like, you know, a group that's issuing out any the equivalent of shares through coins or anything like that. And so the roadway to being approved would be a lot smoother, whereas you have some legal problems going on with XRP and Solana. Maybe those have to get ironed out first before they can continue through that filing process to get further along. But once those things get cleared up or whatever, then you would think that the rest of the way is smooth sailing for them as well. So each one ends up going through the same route to get there, but perhaps the time frame and the formalities included in it are completely different.
If they approve the Doge filing, you would think that they'd have to approve the Litecoin filing, since Doge is merge mined with Litecoin. So from
Yeah, and it follows the
technical
same
perspective,
concept, right?
functionally,
Yeah,
there's no difference. Yeah,
right. It's
right.
proof of work. It's the same type of deal. So there really wouldn't be, and vice versa. Like if they approved the Litecoin one, you would think that, you know, they would approve the Dogecoin one. So there's some of them, it's almost like a formality,
Right.
more than anything else. It's just the ones that have had issues in the past with the prior SEC specifically, that those things would have to get ironed out first before they probably get approved.
Right. I want to go back to what you touched on before, which is the new ETFs. It doesn't sound like functionally there should be any barriers to entry for almost any crypto, as long as they meet those minimum criteria of having volume, having some sort of cultural relevancy. If some of the foundations or the dev wallets of some of these cryptos meet the decentralization criteria, but don't necessarily have like a central treasury or war chest to draw from in order to pay, then it would be possible for us as members of the crypto community to pool together funds and apply together as almost like a DAO.
I mean, that would be another historic thing to do, right? Maybe create a DAO specifically for ETF filings for an asset or a group of assets or something. And that's the beauty of this whole space in general, is kind of taking what was and morphing it into what, what it could be. I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility, but if there's enough smart people with the motivation and the funds to do so, perhaps, yeah.
That would be very exciting and unprecedented. I'd be open to starting something like that. Pull together a DAO, leverage the community pools of, because I'm interested in Cosmos, right? Like several Cosmos app chains, create a Cosmos IBC DAO that spends the money to explicitly apply for a Cosmos ecosystem index.
Yeah.
That would be
You'd
cool.
probably want to make sure the DAO is set up in a state that's friendly to DAOs too, right? That allows them to be built up. I know Tennessee,
Wyoming, right?
Wyoming, Tennessee is a friendly state to
Oh,
DAOs. There's a few others. So, I mean,
mm-hmm.
that'd probably be the first step. Get somebody legally who's either worked on ETFs or at least knows the process for doing something like that, get involved and go from there.
Why is there this distinction between Canary and the Litecoin Foundation?
Canary was at this point the only, but also the first that's filed a single asset ETF for Litecoin. I don't believe it'll be the last, but Stephen McClurg, who prior to this was part of CoinShares and prior to that, Valkyrie Investments, which was acquired by CoinShares, he actually was the author of one of the first Bitcoin ETFs that was approved, right? So he's done this. They also had one that was done while he was with Valkyrie that was it was a Bitcoin mining ETF. So it would be an ETF where people could buy into the companies that were mining in the States on Bitcoin and stuff. And so he's had experience with this. He understands where this entire industry is going. And it's not going to be limited to Bitcoin, as much as Bitcoin maxis would love to believe that Bitcoin is going to be the end all be all for everything. The way the space is moving, it's proving them to be wrong. They may end up being the head of it, right? And the rest of the body follows. But at the same time, they're not going to be the head, the arms, the legs, everything in between. And so Stephen's smart enough to recognize that. And so I think what he did was he sort of figured out, okay, well, where are the ones that probably deserve to have one that are not Bitcoin and Ethereum, and concentrate on those and be sort of like the frontier man for that, which I mean, if you think about it, it's a ballsy move because it could fall back on him. But I think those first three that he picked, being XRP, Litecoin, and Solana, were smart picks because they're popular enough. They have enough momentum, and they would be the ones most likely to garner interest. And so he decided Litecoin ETF is something he wanted to do. And so, we're more than happy to help facilitate whatever he needs on his end, but it's really kind of his baby. So
it does speak to the decentralization of the Litecoin community, right? There's like various people and entities pushing towards a shared objective. Before we close out, David, is there anything else you would like to note? This has been incredibly insightful and it has actually inspired me in many ways. So I'm really happy to talk to you and reconnected after, year and a half.
I'd love to see if you're the first one to create a DAO that gets an ETF approved. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, that would be incredible.
Yeah, I think for us, really, we're just concentrating on still, pounding home the narrative that Litecoin is the digital silver of the world, and that it's absolutely built for payments and remittances. And we have an optional privacy layer on Litecoin. So that's something I think a lot of people don't really know. There's a wrapped Litecoin now. There's, these are all things where, like, if you don't have a high marketing budget, a lot of people maybe they don't know about it, right? But we have ordinals. We have over 40 million ordinals on Litecoin. I mean, all these things that you think of that are on other chains, minus probably smart contracts, you can do on Litecoin. And now there's even a Litecoin computer organization out of South America that's able to do the smart contracts and everything else. So I think if people can just understand that Litecoin is not just this Dino coin that just sits there in the top 25 and does nothing but, transactions, it's much, much more than that. It's just getting the word out is very tough for us, being a decentralized crypto with no war chest for that type of marketing, right? But it's there. People love it. The people that use it love it. They're just, diehard community members. And I think other than that, we have a Litecoin summit every year. And this year's Litecoin summit just got announced. It's going to be May 29th and 30th in Las Vegas at Harrah's. So if you go to litecoin.com/summit-2025, tickets are only $84. That's our theme. We have it at $84. And anybody who gets a ticket, you get access to everything everybody else has. There's no tiers or anything. And we'll have an ETF panel there. We'll have a panel on merge mining. So there should be somebody from Doge and Bell's Coin there. And, all the stuff that we do will be highlighted. It's always a good time.
That sounds like fun. I would love to go because I am going for Bitcoin Vegas.
See, it's right next door. Literally, it's right next door to the Venetian where the Bitcoin one is. So theirs is the 27th through the 29th, and ours is the 29th and 30th. So it overlaps one day. So somebody who wants to be into Vegas into the weekend, just come out to the Litecoin Summit after you've done the Bitcoin one, and you get yourself a taste of the two, OG proof of work coins for their hashing algorithms.
Litecoin is one of the few coins left that is still on proof of work.
Yep.
As proof of work coins get more rare, it is more critical to keep them alive.
Yes.
So long as it could remain profitable to mine Litecoin, and especially as the supply of Bitcoin goes down, or the subsidy, the block subsidy goes down.
Yeah, it's already more profitable to mine Litecoin and Dogecoin than it is Bitcoin. So the other thing we want to try and do is get more miners to integrate a percentage of their mining operations to script mining as much as they are Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin's the SHA-256 algorithm, and then Litecoin and Dogecoin and a few others are on script mining. So if you were to mine both of them and alternate when you're mining them, you can triple your profits as a mining company.
They're script ASICs, right?
Absolutely. Bitmain's the main one,
Right.
and then there's some others who do some really good work too. Like Locotech has a very good script mining mechanism in place too. So that would be another one to look at.
I kind of do think it's bullish that it's not too well known yet that Litecoin does privacy, because then use the ETF as a Trojan horse to get institutional capital before they're a privacy property. Because, someone from the Monero Foundation probably could apply and they would never get it, right? Because of AML KYC concerns.
So here's the interesting part to that is before we ever looked at proposing to integrate optional privacy, Charlie went out and talked to all the main exchanges to make sure that they were okay with it. If they would end up, delisting it or anything, and they all said, no, that's not an issue with us. As long as the Litecoin that's coming in or going out is just on the regular chain, it's not part of the optional privacy chain, they were okay. And it's not built into the base code. It's actually an extension block. So every time a base block is created every 2.5 minutes, an extension block is created with it. And so all of the optional privacy stuff happens over here, and then it gets reintegrated into the base block before the next one's created. And that's different than your Moneros and your Dashes and your what's the other one? Zcash, right? So all of those, it's literally built into their code. This is completely different. And I think that makes it much more friendly. Banks don't seem to care. We've had interactions with banks, and they've done their due diligence on Litecoin, and they seem to be okay with it. So I think it's got the green light all the way around.
Yeah, you're right. It's good because, Litecoin is using rather obscure technology that is just as functionally, technically innovative as any other, privacy stack. The extension block aspect came from during the Bitcoin block size debates, Joseph Poon and Christopher Jeffries' invention, right? Even though that didn't get merged to Bitcoin and SegWit, extension blocks nevertheless remained a good technical solution for expanding the block space de facto without actually explicitly doing so. Litecoin, I believe, for the privacy part, you're using Mimblewimble's innovation, the fully homomorphic encryption. So that's also another novel privacy piece that isn't used in Monero's confidential transactions. To see those solutions being preserved and tested out on the Litecoin mainnet is really, I think it's really bullish, and I hope that the Litecoin ETF goes through. So
thank you.
Thank you for coming on the podcast, David. It really opens the door for the rest of crypto. Once they admit the first blue chips, why wouldn't they admit all or most of the rest, barring like straight up scams?
Yeah, I agree.
For those of you who would like to join the Litecoin conference, go to the link in the description below. Thanks for coming on.
Sounds good.